Some truths are buried not to deceive, but to protect the only thing left worth saving. Now let me speak. Without trembling. Without shame. The first time she slammed my head into the kitchen tiles, I thought I'd die. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. Just held the back of my neck and used the force of her youth. Crack. Then again. Crack. My blood mixed with the rice I was sorting on the floor. My son stood in the doorway. He turned around and walked away. I raised that boy alone. After his father left, I worked in houses, on roadsides, in night kitchens to feed him, clothe him, educate him. He had soft hands. He married a girl who saw my rough ones and spat. She said I stank like old milk. She said the house was hers now, that I'd wash her feet when she returned from her parlor visits, and once I did. Because I had no choice. Because the child I bore watched from the sofa and didn't flinch. One day she ordered me to drink the water she washed in. She dipped her toes in the steel tumbler. "Drink, Amma," she smiled. I held the rim, my hands shaking. I didn't cry. I learned not to cry. She took my gold bangles. She burned my saris. She locked the kitchen from outside for 2 days, told the neighbors I had gone to the village. I lived on tap water and old chapatis I hid under the stove. She said I was a burden, a witch, that I should have died with my husband. Their relatives came during Diwali. They mocked me. One had pinched my chest and said, "Is this where you kept your pride?" I served them food with blistered palms. My son laughed, and I wanted to die. But I didn't, because a girl in the next building used to wave at me from her window. Because her baby once held my finger when I passed by. Because something inside me still lived, faint, like a whisper. I'll tell you how I left. How I found a little shop and swept floors until they gave me work. How I slept in a storeroom with rats for warmth. How I met a child who called me Ma without knowing who I was. I'll tell you how I built a home from nothing but breath and pain. How I buried a truth no mother should ever carry. But not yet. This is only the beginning. Before we begin, I want to thank you for being here. Your presence, your ears, they give me strength I never had back then. If my voice reaches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It helps more than you know. And tell me, where are you listening from? I want to know how far the story can travel, how far hope can reach. The morning after she banged my head against the kitchen floor, I woke up with dried blood in my hair and the taste of steel in my mouth. My body ached, but I was quiet. I learned early that silence was safer than protest. I folded the wet cloth beneath my head and pushed myself upright, steadying against the wall. Outside, they laughed over breakfast, my son and his wife. She liked to hum old film songs when she was satisfied, dragging each note like a knife over my back. The door was locked from the outside. I wasn't surprised. It was her new trick, trapping me like a stray animal, keeping me inside until she wanted something: food, laundry, money from my pension. She even told the neighbor once, "Amma has stomach problems. She needs rest." I never had a choice in the lies she told about me. There was no fan, and the heat made the walls sweat. I sat on the floor and counted the tiny ants climbing over a broken biscuit. Hunger came slowly, like shame. I knew better than to cry out. The last time I did, she poured boiling water near my feet and said, "Next time, I won't miss." So I stayed silent, pressing my ear to the door for any sound of unlocking. That day, I urinated in a small steel bowl and hid it behind the gas cylinder. I tore a piece of my petticoat to wipe myself. The room smelled like old wounds. I started reciting God's name under my breath, not out of faith, but just to keep my mind from breaking apart. I had nowhere to go, no one left to call. Everyone believed she was a good daughter-in-law. Polite outside. A monster only behind closed doors. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was how ordinary it had become. The routine of cruelty. She timed my meals, gave me leftovers scraped from her plate, and forced me to eat on the floor beside the dustbin. My son, he avoided my eyes now. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe he no longer saw me as his mother. Just another mouth in his house. I still had the photograph from our first house, before she came, before he changed. It was tucked in my blouse, folded so many times the corners had turned to dust. I looked at it that day, holding it like a prayer. Back then, he was just a boy with scraped knees and a hunger for stories. He used to kiss my hand when I brought him sweets. He used to say, "Amma, I'll take care of you always." I believed him. I don't know when love turns into something sharp. I don't know when a child forgets the sound of his mother's suffering. But that day, locked in the kitchen, I promised myself one thing. If I ever got out, I would never return. Even if I had to crawl. Even if I had to sleep on a footpath. I would leave. And I would carry something with me. A truth. A truth I would protect like a flame cupped in my palms. She gave me a red sari once. Not out of kindness, never that. It was for a wedding, her cousin's daughter. She said I couldn't wear my old ones, said they smelled like mildew and memories. She picked the one with the brightest color, not knowing or maybe knowing that I hated red. I wore it anyway. When you are powerless, you learn to obey. Even when every thread itches like punishment. The wedding was full of people who knew me once, years ago, when I still had some dignity left. They barely recognized me now. I stood near the back, close to the kitchen entrance, where no one would ask me questions. Her mother passed by and didn't look at me. Only her youngest brother smiled. He always had a cruel mouth, too sharp for his face. After the rituals, I was made to serve sweets to the guests. My back hurt, but I smiled the way she had taught me, lips tight, head low. "Respect the family," she hissed under her breath. "Don't embarrass us." When I reached her table, her hand brushed mine deliberately, and the spoon clattered. Everyone looked. I bent down to pick it up, and as I rose, she whispered, "Even now, you're good only for the floor." Later that night, back at home, she made me kneel beside the bathroom drain and clean it with my bare hands. She said her heels hurt and that elders should be useful. When I hesitated, she tugged the red sari so hard the blouse tore at the shoulder. My son didn't even look up from his phone. I cleaned that drain like it was holy. My knees bruised, the water cold. I used to think pain had a limit. It doesn't. It stretches, reshapes itself. It becomes routine. And in that routine, something inside you starts to harden. I stopped speaking unless spoken to. I stopped asking questions. I became shadow. But shadows notice things. I watched as my son gave her money behind closed doors while I went without slippers. I heard their late-night talks about selling the old village land that was in my name. She wanted to build a boutique. He wanted to invest. I was just a roadblock, breathing, aging, inconvenient. They started mixing sleeping pills in my food. Not every night. Just enough. I'd wake up confused, dizzy, sometimes lying in a puddle of my own urine. She said I was going senile. That old age looked bad on me. That it was time I stopped pretending to be needed. I began hiding dry biscuits in the cupboard. Tiny things. Just in case. I didn't know when or how, but the feeling came stronger every day. I had to leave. One afternoon, while she was out getting her nails painted and he was at work, I opened the old tin trunk where she kept her discarded things. I found the red sari again, crumpled and stained. I folded it carefully and placed it under my pillow. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of how low I'd been pushed, of how far I would have to rise. My escape hadn't come yet, but the idea of it had taken root, and I watered it silently each night. With rage, with memory, with the truth I still hadn't told anyone. The bruise on my cheek lasted 11 days. It was shaped like the corner of a cupboard door. That's what she told everyone. She's old, she falls. I didn't correct her, because the truth was uglier. She'd asked me to cut onions. I was slow. My fingers shook from hunger. The blade slipped and nicked my thumb. She screamed like I'd insulted her soul. She dragged me to the living room by my hair and struck me across the face. Twice. then again with the back of her phone. The baby from the upstairs flat was watching from the balcony. I heard him laugh. She turned to wave at him, then looked at me and whispered, "Smile now. You're on stage." I lay on the floor for a long time that day. The floor was cool, safer than standing. I thought of my mother's house, long gone now, burned in a flood of debts and silence. She used to tell me, a woman's back must be broad like a bullock's. That's where everyone sits. She didn't say what happens when it breaks. The next morning, the maid arrived early. A young girl with gold studs and red bangles. She paused when she saw my face. Then she looked away, fast, like it hurt her to see me like that. I wanted to hold her wrist and say, "Don't become this." But I had no voice left that someone would believe. That evening, my son brought sweets from his office. He handed me a small box without looking at me. It had 2 pieces of rasgulla. I took one bite and felt the sugar sting inside my mouth where the skin had torn. He said, "Why are you always limping, Amma? You should walk more." She laughed and said, "Yes, otherwise she'll rot in that corner." I looked down at the floor. If I had looked up, I would have screamed. But I didn't. I stayed silent. Because silence kept me alive. Later, I sat in the kitchen, watching the ants crawl across the spilled sugar. And I began to remember something I'd buried deep. Something from before my son was born. Before the wedding. Before the house with locked doors and red saris. A secret. A lie I told to survive. A lie I wrapped in silence so tightly I'd almost forgotten how much it still hurt. I wasn't just abused. I was once taken. Owned. Forced into something no woman should have to live through. And from that came a child. One I never told anyone about. Not even him. Long before this house, before the bruises and the kitchen floors, there was another place. Another life. I was 16. A servant in a rich household. Marble floors, brass bells, polished cruelty. He was the eldest son. Married. His wife had gone to her parents' home for the summer. And I was alone in the back quarters, folding his shirts. It started with silence. Then a door closing. Then the sound of footsteps on the stone floor. I tried to scream once. He pressed a cloth over my mouth. I bled for 2 days. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and chose not to see. I left that house 2 months later. Pregnant. Sent away with 50 rupees and a thin cotton shawl. I didn't know where to go. So I went to the temple, sat behind the priest's quarters, and worked for scraps. The baby grew inside me like a ticking clock. No joy. No dreams. Just inevitability. When the labor came, I bit down on my own hand to keep from shouting. It was a girl. Tiny. Quiet. Her eyes opened right away. I named her Mira, after a goddess who survived with nothing but songs. But I had no songs. Just milk and fear. I kept her with me for 3 days. Then an old woman at the temple said, "She'll starve. Give her to someone who can feed her." I wrapped her in my shawl and placed her at the doorstep of a childless couple. They had a cow, a home, a brass nameplate. I knocked once. Ran. Didn't look back. No one knows about her. Not even the son I raised. Not even the man I married years later. Mira is out there somewhere. Grown now. Maybe with her own child. Maybe with my eyes. I kept her secret locked inside me. Because the world punishes women who carry shame that isn't theirs. Because I had to survive, marry, mother again. And I did. But I never stopped wondering what her voice would have sounded like when she cried for me that first night. If she cried, I wonder if she thinks I abandoned her. If she hates me. But what I did to save her, even if it broke something permanent inside me. There was a small storeroom in the back of the house. Windowless. Airless. Used for broken chairs and rusted boxes. She made me sleep there after guests complained I coughed too much in the hallway. I wasn't sick. I was choking on silence. The first night in that room, she handed me a torn blanket and said, "Be grateful I didn't throw you out like trash." My son stood behind her, arms crossed. His face was empty, like a shell. There was no bulb inside, only the thin line of light that slipped in under the door. I lay on the cold floor, knees pulled to my chest, listening to the rats scratching in the walls. I whispered Mira's name into the dark. Not my son's. Not anymore. My back ached constantly. She made me carry buckets of water up 2 flights every morning before dawn. If I spilled even a drop, she'd pour the entire bucket over the steps and make me scrub them again. She said, "Discipline makes good servants." She meant, you are not family anymore. They kept their things locked, even leftover food. Once, I ate from the dog's bowl. Not because I wanted to, because there was nothing else. And hunger has no pride. I began saving matchsticks from the kitchen. Each night in that dark room, I'd light one for a second, just to see something. My own hand, the crack in the ceiling. Proof I still existed. One night, I found a small photograph in an old box in the storeroom, my wedding photo. I had been 19. My eyes still held softness. I touched the face of the man beside me, my husband, long dead. He wasn't perfect, but he never hit me, never sold my bangles, never locked me away. Sometimes I wondered, if he hadn't died so early, would my son have grown into something better? Or was the seed always there, waiting for cruelty to give it water? That room became my grave for months. I slept and woke and existed in silence. But something inside me stayed alive. A tiny, stubborn spark. Not love. Not hope. Something fiercer. I began making plans. To leave. To disappear. Not yet, but soon, because I still had the strength to walk. Still had the truth curled like a knife under my ribs. And one day I'd use it. It started one morning with a shattered glass. I had dropped it while washing the breakfast plates. My hands were wet and the rim slipped through my fingers. It broke into 4 clean pieces. I bent down quickly to collect them, but she had already heard the sound. She stormed into the kitchen, her slippers smacking against the tiles like warnings. "You break what you don't pay for," she said, her voice rising. "You waste what you don't earn." Then she grabbed the hot milk from the stove and poured it into the sink, not all of it, just enough to burn my hands when I tried to stop her. She laughed, mocking me, saying, "Now you'll have to lick it from the basin like the dog you are." And she meant it. She stood there, waiting. My hands were red and trembling. The steam stung my nose. I looked up at her, searching for even a shadow of the girl I once welcomed into my family. There was nothing left. Just rotten silk clothing. I didn't lick the milk. Not that day. But I didn't speak either. Because every word would have cost me more. Later, my son asked me why my palms were blistered. She said I had touched a hot pan by mistake. He nodded, just nodded, and left the room. That night, she came in with a pair of old slippers, mine, from before. She threw them on the floor and said, "You're stinking the whole house. Go wash your feet. Use your hands if needed, then come drink the water." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She stood there until I crouched near the bucket. The water was murky, gray with soap and filth. I dipped my feet in, cleaned them with my bare hands, and waited. She handed me a steel cup. I didn't take it. She said, "Drink it or I'll pour it down your throat." I turned away. She kicked me in the ribs. Then again. I don't remember how many times. At some point, I sipped. Just enough for her to believe I'd done it. The humiliation sat on my tongue like rust. I crawled back into the storeroom that night. I didn't cry. That was long over. My body had grown numb to the shape of pain. But inside, something was stirring. Something deep and dangerous. The part of me that once left Mira at a doorstep. The part that chose survival over shame. I began collecting small things. A coin here. A threadbare shawl. A piece of roti wrapped in old paper. Not because I had a plan yet, but because when you're caged, even the thought of escape needs nourishment. Sometimes, I saw glimpses of what used to be my son. In small gestures. A cup of tea left at my door when she wasn't home. a look of guilt when our eyes met for too long. But guilt doesn't undo cruelty. It just stains it in silence. He never hit me, but he let her. And that, too, is a kind of violence. A deeper one. The kind that says, your pain doesn't matter if it inconveniences me. They made jokes about me at family dinners. Called me Pagliama. Old. Useless. Forgetful. I remembered everything. I remembered the girl I raised. The child I abandoned. The boy who once held my hand after a nightmare and whispered, I won't let anything hurt you. I remembered the girl in the temple. Blood on her legs. A newborn in her arms. And no place in the world. That girl had become this old woman. Bent, blistered, hungry. But still alive. That's when I knew I wouldn't die here. Not in this house. Not under their feet. One day, they would wake up. And I would be gone. And the truth I carried, like a secret flame in my gut, I would take it with me. Diwali came that year with bright lights and louder cruelty. She decorated the house like it was a temple. Fairy lights, marigold garlands, new curtains. She bought herself a golden sari and posted pictures online, captioned, grateful for family. I scrubbed the veranda until my knees bled. She said, the guests will see the floor first, not your face. Make it shine. I used water mixed with acid and a torn piece of cloth. She gave me no gloves. My fingers cracked open from the chemicals. That evening, she handed me a used corda of hers, already stained under the arms. Wear this. Don't embarrass us. I wore it. Because survival doesn't come dressed in pride. The house was filled with people I once called relatives. No one looked me in the eye. They saw me, yes, saw my hunched back, my silent mouth, my cracked hands. But no one saw me, the person beneath the bruises. One woman, an old friend of mine from years ago, asked, you still live here? I nodded. She looked away, eyes filled with something close to pity. Then she smiled and went back to her sweets. That night, I was told to sleep outside on the balcony. They said I would smell up the house. She gave me a thin bedsheet and said the firecrackers would keep me warm. The sky boomed and flashed above me as I lay curled in a corner beneath the clothesline. Sparks from a spinning chakra landed near my feet. I didn't flinch. My body had stopped reacting long ago. Around midnight, I heard them laughing from inside. My son, her, their friends. They were playing cards. Someone won 5,000 rupees. She screamed with joy. I remembered when she first came into my house, years ago. A slim girl with downcast eyes and quiet words. I fed her, welcomed her, gave her bangles from my own wedding. Now she locked the kitchen after dinner so I wouldn't steal rice. Once the laughter died down, I sat up and unwrapped a piece of roti I had saved from lunch. It was hard as stone. I dipped it into the leftover water from my cleaning bucket and chewed slowly. It tasted like defeat, but also like resistance. That night, I dreamed of Mira. She was lighting a diya on a windowsill, her face calm, her hands strong. She looked nothing like me. And yet, I knew. She was the only light left in me. When I woke up, the first diya on the balcony had gone out. The wind had taken it. But the spark inside me remained. Small, silent, unyielding. I began writing names in my head. Shelters, ashrams, people I had once helped long ago. I didn't know who would still remember me, but I was going to try. Because the story of my life would not end in that balcony, beneath someone else's happiness. It happened on a Thursday. Ordinary. Dry heat. The kind of day where clothes on the line stiffen into paper. She had asked me to clean the kitchen shelves. Every jar had to be emptied, wiped, and refilled. I stood on a stool, unscrewing the lids, my back tight, my breath shallow. She came in, looked at the time, and said, "Still not done? You're slower than death." I stepped down to explain, something about the ants in the sugar. She didn't wait. She grabbed my hair and slammed my head into the kitchen counter. Once, twice, 3 times. The third blow sent a ring through my ears like temple bells struck wrong. I fell. The floor felt warm under my cheek. I remember seeing a small puddle of something red. It wasn't from the tomatoes. My head throbbed in beats. The tiles beneath me were cracked. Like me. She stood over me and said, "Don't bleed on the floor." I just cleaned it. Then she walked out. I lay there for hours. No one came. Not even him. Later, I dragged myself to the bathroom and washed the blood from my scalp with cold water. It stung. It didn't stop. There were no bandages in the house for me. I used the edge of my old sari, tied it tight across my forehead, and sat in the corner of the bathroom, shaking. That was the last time I bled. After that, something inside me sealed shut. Not just the wound, but the part of me that waited for kindness. The part that still believed I mattered to my own blood. He saw the bandage later that night. Asked, "Did you fall again?" I nodded. He turned back to his phone. And just like that, my motherhood ended. From that day, I became something else. Not mother. Not woman. Not servant. I became a ghost that moved through the house. I did what was asked. I ate what was thrown. I slept where they told me. But inside, I was building something. A memory. A truth. A quiet rebellion. I began hiding little things. A spoon. A safety pin. One of her old SIM cards. A faded photo of Mira tucked in the lining of my blouse. Because I knew I was going to leave. Not with noise. Not with drama. But like smoke. Soft. Slow. Certain. No one would see me go. But they would remember the emptiness I left behind. And one day, I would speak again. Not to hurt. Not to beg. But to tell the truth I had carried like a stone in my throat all these years. I started counting time differently. Not in days or months, but in small things. The number of times she slammed the door. How often I hid food under my blouse. How long I could hold a thought without crying. One morning, I saw a bird trapped between the grill and the glass of the balcony. A myna. Its wings beat against the pane, wild and hopeless. I opened the door slowly, and it flew out, just like that. I stood there, hand still on the knob, watching it vanish into the sky. And something inside me whispered, "It's possible." That evening, I asked her calmly, gently, if I could visit the temple for my health. Just once a week. She narrowed her eyes and said, "What health? You're already half dead." Then she laughed and said, "Fine. But be back before the rice cooks." She didn't know what she had given me. I went the next morning. Wore my faded blue sari. Walked slowly, like someone with no plans. But every step was a piece of my freedom. The temple had changed. The priest's son had taken over. He didn't recognize me. But the space still smelled of oil lamps and old hope. I sat in a corner, lit one dia, and closed my eyes. Didn't pray. Just listened. To the sound of my own breath. To the girl I once was, kneeling here with blood between her legs and a newborn in her lap. I asked around, quietly, about shelters. Homes for the aged. Work. Anything. An old woman near the well said, "Try the ashram near Bhagalpur Road." They don't ask too many questions. I held the address in my mind like a jewel. Didn't write it down. Didn't tell anyone. Back home, I cooked dinner. She complained the dal was thin. He didn't even taste it. I smiled. Because now I had something they didn't, a way out. I started walking to the temple every third day. Sometimes I just sat. Sometimes I spoke to strangers, women in veils, tired mothers, widows. We all carried something we couldn't name. But we saw it in each other. One woman had a bruised cheek and a silver ring missing from her hand. Another had stitched her blouse 3 times with the same thread. We didn't ask questions. We just offered each other silence. And in that silence, there was strength. Back at the house, things got worse. She accused me of stealing her earrings. He believed her. They slapped me. Together. He didn't even flinch. That night, I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling in the storeroom and repeated the directions to the ashram in my head. Bhagalpur Road. Behind the banyan tree. Blue Gate. Ask for Sister Miriam. The next visit to the temple, I asked a kind vendor for a paper and pencil. I drew a small map, folded it inside my blouse. I was almost ready. Almost. Just needed one more thing. The right moment. And I knew, when it came, I wouldn't miss it. Not this time. The winter came slowly that year, like a bruise spreading under the skin. The mornings turned colder, but she didn't give me a shawl. She had 3 of them, soft, warm, still smelling of camphor, but said mine was too dirty to save. I stitched together old pillowcases to cover my shoulders at night. In the storeroom, the walls seemed to breathe. Cold air came through the cracks like whispers. I woke up every morning with stiff joints and fog in my mouth. Still, I cooked, I scrubbed, I folded her saris just the way she liked, crease to crease, no pleats showing. I didn't want her rage on days when I needed silence more than anything. Each day I visited the temple now, I gave them a piece of myself. A little more truth. A little less fear. I spoke softly to Sister Miriam. She wore a cotton white habit and spoke with words that didn't poke, didn't bruise. She looked me in the eye when she said, "You can come here when you're ready. You don't need to ask." That made my throat tighten in a way even beatings hadn't. It had been years since someone told me I could. I had almost forgotten that permission could be kind. At home, I stayed smaller, quieter. That made her angrier. She didn't like it when I didn't react. One day, she spilled hot tea on the floor near my feet, then screamed that I'd dropped it. He came into the room and, without asking, slapped me. A sharp, thoughtless blow. Not rage, just routine. I didn't touch my cheek. I just looked at him and thought, "You weren't born like this. I held your hand the first time you walked. I kept you alive during the famine. And now, here you are, offering your mother to the fire for peace in your marriage." They told their neighbors I was going senile. That I muttered to myself, forgot names, left taps running. I didn't. I remembered everything. I remembered the baby girl I had once handed to a stranger with trembling fingers and a broken soul. I remembered the cries echoing through the temple walls as I bled, as I bit my lip to stop myself from naming her. I remembered telling my son, years later, that she had died. A lie I shaped like a lullaby. I told myself it was to protect him. Not because I was ashamed, but because some truths are too large to carry in a child's arms. Now, I remembered all of it because I would need to tell her soon, Mira. The girl I left behind. The girl who had no name for so long. I had seen her again, once. Years ago. By accident. She had walked past me in a market, buying bangles. Grown, tall, strong. I didn't speak. I couldn't. But I watched her pay with her own money, laugh with a friend, wear her life like armor. And I knew she had made it, somehow. Without me. And that was enough. For then. But now? Now I needed to find her. To tell her the truth. Not because I wanted forgiveness. But because she had the right to know who she was. And that she had never, not even for a moment, been unwanted. I began saving bus fare. A few rupees at a time. From coin trays, from under cushions, from the bottom of buckets. She never noticed. She never thought I could plan anything anymore. That was her mistake. One night I stayed awake, mapping everything in my head. From the house to the temple. From the temple to Bhagalpur Road. From there to the station. From the station to the city records office, where maybe, just maybe, I'd find a trace of Mira. I whispered it like a prayer. Sister Miriam. Bhagalpur. Blue Gate. Banyan tree. Mira. Forgive me. Or don't. But know me. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. My bones ached. I pressed my palms together under the blanket and let one slow tear fall into the dust. Not from pain. Not from fear. From knowing the end was near. And this time, it would not be a burial. It would be a beginning. It was raining. Thin sheets, cold and persistent. The kind of rain that makes the world quieter but sharpens everything inside your mind. The roof leaked near the storeroom, so I placed an old steel plate under the drip. The sound was rhythmic: tap, 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 a kind of slow drumbeat for my thoughts. That night, something changed. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the way my bones felt heavier than ever. Maybe it was just time. But I decided if the door was left open again, I would leave. I wouldn't wait for a sign, or a perfect moment, or even for Sister Miriam. I would walk out with nothing but my pain and my memory, and I would make something from that. 2 days before, I had packed a small cloth bag. It had a pair of old slippers, a photo of Mira folded tightly, and a few coins, just enough for the early bus. I wrapped a biscuit in newspaper and tucked it inside, along with a string of prayer beads my own mother had given me decades ago when I became a bride. My son had not looked at me for weeks. Not truly. He spoke around me, through me, like I was part of the wall. The last time we had touched was when he shoved me aside to open a cupboard. I had once bathed this boy with warm oil, sung him lullabies in the heat of summer nights. Now his eyes held nothing. Not even cruelty. Just emptiness. And her? That daughter-in-law with the sharp tongue and glass smile? She had taken to throwing things near me instead of at me. Perhaps she feared the marks were too visible. Or perhaps she no longer needed to hurt my body. She had already claimed everything else. The kitchen, the keys, the air I breathed. That night, after dinner, I washed the dishes as usual. The water was cold. The soap had run out days ago. I used Ash. My fingers were cracked and bleeding, but I scrubbed until the steel plates shone. She liked them that way. It gave her peace, she said, to see her house in order. I dried my hands on my sari, went to the storeroom, and sat still in the dark. Waiting, listening. At 11:32 p.m. I heard it. The back door creaked, then clicked, left ajar. She often forgot to bolt it properly when she came back in from watering her plants. This time, she hadn't returned to check. I stood up slowly. My knees groaned. My heart did not. I put on my blouse, tied my palu tight, and picked up the cloth bag I had hidden under the broken trunk. I looked around once, at the rusted Godrej cupboard, the box of old photos I'd never dared open, the corner where I had once wept silently through a fever. Then I stepped out. The air was sharp with wet leaves and mud. I walked slowly at first, barefoot, not wanting to make a sound. Past the tulsi plant. Past the old swing. Past the window where I once watched Mira take her first steps before they took her away. Then I ran. The rain washed my face. My hair clung to my neck. My blouse soaked through in minutes. But I didn't stop. Not for breath, not for fear, not even for grief. I reached the main road by dawn. Waited behind the temple wall for the first bus to Bhagalpur. My hands trembled as I held the coins out to the conductor. He didn't look twice at me, just nodded and moved on. I took the last seat by the window. And for the first time in decades, I didn't know what would happen next. But I was free. Free in the way a broken bird is free when it remembers its wings. Free in the way a woman becomes herself again, not because someone gave her permission, but because she no longer needed it. I closed my eyes, thought of Mira, whispered her name like a promise. And the bus rolled forward, carrying me not toward escape, but toward truth. The city was loud. Everything moved faster here, cars, people, voices. Even the wind seemed to rush. I stood outside the municipal records office with dust on my hem and hesitation in my chest. It had been more than 25 years. I didn't have a case number. I didn't have proof. All I had was a name whispered once in the dark and held tightly ever since. I walked in slowly, clutching my bag close. The man at the desk looked up and then past me, as if expecting someone else. Someone stronger. Someone less old. But I stayed. My voice cracked when I spoke. I'm looking for a girl. Born around 1999. Name: Mira. Possibly adopted. I stopped. The lie caught in my throat. Not a lie, just a silence I had lived too long inside. I gave her up, I whispered. At a temple. I didn't want to, but I had to. The man frowned, said, "We don't keep records of abandoned children here. Try the church shelter. Or the nuns at Mercy Home." He didn't say it cruelly, but he said it like a door closing. I walked the 2 kilometers to the Mercy Home, the rain having dried to mist. My legs ached. My slippers had started to tear at the sole. I had eaten nothing since morning. At the gate, a nun looked me over with gentle eyes. She didn't ask questions, just brought me inside, gave me warm water, and listened. When I spoke Mira's name, her brow lifted. We had a girl by that name once. She was found near a temple, wrapped in a thin yellow cloth. No note. I gripped the edge of my chair. She continued. She was adopted. Taken by a couple from another city. Not far from here. We lost touch. But I remember her. Strong girl. Always trying to climb the window grills. I wanted to ask if she ever cried at night. If she ever whispered "Ma" into the pillow, not knowing whose name it was. But I said nothing, just nodded and pressed my lips tight until the pain passed. The nun gave me an address. Old. Possibly out of date. "You can try," she said. "Or leave it alone. Some wounds don't want reopening." But mine wasn't a wound. It was a grave. And something inside it was still breathing. That night, I slept in the shelter. On a mat beside women who had lost more than I could name. A mother who had run from her son. A girl who refused to marry her rapist. A widow who had spoken too loudly, too often. We didn't talk. Just shared warmth in the dark. I felt less alone in that silence than I had in all the years spent serving food to people who hated me. In the morning, I took a shared auto to the address on the slip. The house was blue. 2 floors. There were flowers on the balcony. I stood across the road for almost an hour, watching. A young woman came out around 9. She wore a faded kurta, had strong arms, a scar near her jaw. She adjusted her bag and locked the gate with quiet efficiency. She didn't look my way. But I knew. Somehow I knew. That was her. Mira. My daughter. Alive. Strong. Unbroken. I didn't go to her. Not yet. My knees trembled. My mouth had forgotten how to say the words she deserved. Instead, I turned away. Found a bench near the bus stop. Sat in the sun, letting it warm my back. I had waited decades. I could wait a little longer. But this time, I would not disappear. I had found her. Now I had to find the right way to speak. Not as a stranger. Not as a ghost. But as a mother. I stayed near the house for 3 more days. Slept in the shelter, ate quietly at the community kitchen, folded my sari at night like it was still being watched. Old habits do not die with distance. They hide under the ribs and resurface when you close your eyes. Each morning, I returned to the same bench across the road. Same time. Same silence. Mira left around 9. Came back near 6. Sometimes with groceries. Once with a child, a little boy who called her Ma and clutched her hand tight. That day, I had to turn my face away. The tears came too suddenly. Not from sorrow. From awe. She had become what I never had the chance to be. A mother without fear. A woman who made her own choices. I watched her speak to the fruit vendor, laugh at something on her phone, tie her son's shoelace without anger or haste. Each action was proof that she had survived not in spite of me, but perhaps because I had let her go. Still, I burned with the words I had never said. I wanted to walk up to her, hold her hand, say her name aloud, tell her I had not abandoned her. That I had been just a girl then, stitched together by pain and silence, and a kind of captivity that no one around me saw as wrong. I wanted her to know I had chosen her safety over my own heart. But how do you begin after such a long silence? How do you say, "I was your mother once"? I still am. Instead, I wrote. Each night, I borrowed paper and pencil from the nun at the shelter and wrote a letter I never gave her. I rewrote it 3 times, tore it up twice, folded the last version and tucked it into the lining of my blouse. It said, "Mira, I was 17. They said I brought shame. They wanted you gone. I had no say. So I left you in a place I prayed would be kind. I never stopped thinking of you. Never. They told me to forget. I remembered. Every day. Every breath. I watched you once, years ago. You were happy. I didn't come closer. I had no right. But you should know, you were not unloved. You were not unwanted. You were saved. Forgive me or don't. But please know me. I am your mother, and I have loved you from the very beginning." Alma, I held the letter tight against my chest and stared at her house through the dusk. The lights came on. The boy danced in the glow of the hallway. She followed, tired but smiling. There was peace in her face. I didn't want to break that. But the truth, it was heavy now. It sat on my spine like a stone. I hadn't carried it this far just to turn back. On the fourth day, I stepped off the bench, walked slowly to the house, slipped the folded letter under the gate. It was small. It wouldn't scream. It would sit there, quiet and steady, waiting for her hands. And I walked away. Didn't look back. Didn't run. I didn't need to watch her read it. I had said the words. That was enough for now. I didn't need answers. Just air. And for the first time in years, I was breathing it fully. I returned to the shelter with sore feet and an emptier chest. Not lighter, just emptied of the silence I had held too long, like finally breathing out after years of holding still. I didn't tell the nun what I had done. She didn't ask. She simply offered me warm rice and a place to sit. That night, I didn't cry. Not even when I heard the coughing of the woman beside me or the low hum of the fan that never worked properly. I lay there, hands under my head, staring at the cracked ceiling. I thought of Mira, of the boy with the soft voice, of the letter now in her hands, or perhaps still untouched under her gate. I didn't know if she would read it. I didn't know if she would believe it. But I had written it. I had let myself be known. In the morning, the nun asked if I wanted to stay longer. "We could use help in the kitchen," she said. "You're good with your hands." I thought of all the years I cooked for those who hated me. The hours spent scrubbing pans for people who never said thank you. But here, the work wasn't punishment. It was offering. I said yes. They gave me a corner bed and a small locker. I had never had my own key before. I held it like a coin of gold. Each morning, I woke early, tied my hair back, and began again. The rice was old, the lentils simple, but I seasoned them with care. I folded sheets, cleaned shelves, bandaged blistered heels. There was no cruelty in that place. Only need. And quiet gratitude. Sometimes, I would walk past Mira's street again. From a distance. Once, I saw her leaving for work. Another time, I saw her watering a plant on the balcony. She looked up. For one sharp moment, I thought her eyes found mine. But she didn't stop, didn't call out. And that was all right. Maybe the letter had been read. Maybe not. The truth didn't belong to just me anymore. It had been handed over. I had done what I came to do. But I was still alive. And that meant I had to build something. I began helping the younger women at the shelter, those who came in after dark, trembling, with ripped clothes and eyes full of hunted silence. I didn't say much. Just showed them where the water was, how to use the soap, where to hang their clothes in the morning. One girl called me Alma by accident. Then again, on purpose. I didn't flinch. Maybe that name could belong to me again. In a different way. One night, as I folded bedsheets in the storeroom, the nun came in. She held out an envelope. "For you," she said. "Dropped off by someone this afternoon. No name. Just said it was for the woman who left the letter." My hands shook. I opened it slowly. Inside, there were only 4 words written in a soft, uncertain hand. "I remember your eyes." I sat down on the floor. The air stilled. My fingers went numb. No return address. No name. But I knew. She had read it. She had seen me. Not forgiven, perhaps. Not yet. But seen. And that was enough for now. The nun offered me a small job. We have old clothes that need mending, she said. You seem steady with your hands. It wasn't much: loose buttons, torn hems, ripped school uniforms left behind by children whose mothers fled without warning. But I sat in that sunlit room with the broken sewing machine and worked as if each thread was a prayer. The room smelled of starch and dust. One window overlooked the street, where schoolgirls walked by in groups, laughing, dragging their bags. I liked that sound. I hadn't heard it in years. Laughter without fear. I didn't speak to the children. Just watched. Sometimes I imagined Mira at that age, braids bouncing, anklets chiming. I never knew what kind of girl she was. The thought used to hurt. Now it just ached. In the shelter, I began teaching the others how to sew. One girl wanted to learn because she'd torn her only salwar and had no money for another. I showed her how to patch it from the inside so no one would see. She smiled. Her teeth were crooked, but her eyes were sharp. You could teach this, she said. Open a class or something. I laughed. I hadn't laughed in years, but the idea stayed. We started with 2 girls, then 4. The nun gave us a stack of cloth scraps. We stitched bags, then cushion covers. Someone came from a local NGO and bought 3 of them, 50 rupees each. We split it. For the first time in my life, I earned money with my name attached to it. No husband, no son, no orders, just hands and thread and care. I used some of it to buy a small comb, a new blouse, and a notebook. In it, I wrote lists, not of chores or fear, but of things I wanted to do. Small things. Clean a temple floor. Sit by a river. See a movie in a theater. Say my name loudly in a room without shame. Sometimes I passed by Mira's house again, always from a distance. I never saw her after that letter, not face to face. But once, I found a small potted plant left outside the shelter gate. It was hibiscus, my favorite. No note, no explanation. But I knew. We were speaking now in gestures. Carefully, with space. That was enough. One evening, as I packed up the stitching work, the girl with the crooked teeth turned to me and asked, "Do you ever miss your family?" I paused. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer was layered, like cloth folded too many times. Yes, I said, but I don't miss who they were. I miss who they could have been. She nodded. Didn't ask more. That night, I sat on the roof of the shelter and looked at the moon. It was full, pale and quiet, like the dreams I once buried and now dared to name again. I had survived cruelty. I had escaped captivity. I had spoken a truth no one else had held for me. Now I was building not from the ruins, but beside them, letting them stay as reminder and warning, but not as home, never again as home. It was a slow Thursday. The girls had gone out with one of the nuns to distribute stitched bags in the market. I stayed behind to clean the room. The fan was still broken and sweat clung to my neck like memory. I was wiping down the shelves when I heard the front gate creak. Voices followed. Low, unfamiliar. The kind of hush that comes before something breaks. I stepped out into the courtyard. And there, standing under the neem tree, were 2 people I hadn't seen in years. My son and his wife. They looked older, more tired, but still sharp at the edges. Her face was powdered, lips pursed like always. His hands were in his pockets. He hadn't changed his posture. Still stood like he owned everything he touched. I didn't speak. Neither did they. Not right away. Finally, he said, "You're alive." Not "how are you" or "we were worried." Just a plain statement, like a complaint. I straightened my back. I was never dead, I said. He glanced around, at the broken walls, the women walking past with laundry baskets. "So this is what you chose? To rot here?" The words stung. Not because they were true, but because they came from him, from the child I had carried and raised, only to be repaid with captivity and shame. His wife stepped forward. "We heard you were here. Someone told us. We thought maybe you'd come back." Back to what? I asked. She didn't answer, just adjusted her scarf and looked away. I remembered her pressing my head against the kitchen counter until blood ran into my eyes. I remembered the time she poured boiling water near my feet to make me move faster. I remembered being told to scrub the soles of her shoes with my hands and drink the water. They had come expecting a broken woman. Instead, they found me standing. He said, "Quieter now, your grandson asks about you." I blinked. What? Our youngest. He remembers you. He asks why you left. I felt a fissure open inside me, one I hadn't expected. I could have said 100 things. That I was driven out. That I was treated like dirt. That I was beaten, humiliated, locked away from light. But I didn't. I looked him in the eye and said, "Tell him I left because I had to save myself. Tell him I love him. That's enough." He looked down. Maybe he remembered, too. The night he slammed the door on my wrist. The way he stood silent as his wife dragged me across the floor. Maybe somewhere it still lived inside him. Or maybe not. I didn't care anymore. I turned to go back inside. He called out, "So you won't come back?" I stopped. Without turning, I said, "I found peace here. I found a life. I don't owe you anything else." And I walked away. My legs were shaking, but my heart was steady. Back in the stitching room, I picked up the needle again. The thread slipped easily through the eye. I stitched with firmer hands that afternoon. The day after their visit, I didn't speak to anyone. I kept to the back room, sorting cloth, winding thread. The girls knew to leave me be. They had their own ghosts to carry. We learned not to ask too much. That night, I sat on the roof again. The moon was thin, barely visible. I thought of the youngest grandson, the only one who used to bring me tea without being told, the one who once cried when he saw my bruises. He had been 5, just a child, like Mira had been, like I once was. I realized then I had spent years blaming myself for being too weak, too silent. But I had also been too young, too bound. And that wasn't a failure. It was survival. A kind of long, hard breath that refused to end. I got up early the next morning, dressed in the blue blouse I liked, packed a cloth bag with a few flowers and a packet of incense. Then I walked, past the chai stalls, the dusty lanes, the whispering walls, back to the house. Not theirs. Mine. The one I grew up in. It had been sold long ago. A crumbling shell now, with paint peeling off the edges and a broken swing hanging from a rusted nail. No one lived there anymore. Just cats and memory. I stepped through the half-open gate. The garden was wild, grass taller than my knees, thorny bushes crowding the path. But I found the spot. Under the mango tree. The one my father had planted when I was born. That's where I buried the small cloth pouch. It held the first photo I ever had of Mira, a copy I'd kept hidden in the lining of a sari for years. It also held a little clay doll I made in the shelter, shaped like a woman kneeling, eyes closed. I pressed the soil around it with both hands, lit the incense, let the smoke rise into the broken morning. "I forgive you," I whispered. Not to them. To myself. To the girl I used to be who didn't know how to fight. Who thought silence was safety. Who carried shame that never belonged to her. I sat there until the sun rose higher. Until the smoke faded. Then I stood. The wind was cool. And for the first time in decades, I felt unburied. A week passed after I buried the doll beneath the mango tree. I didn't return. Some doors don't need to be opened twice. The letter had been sent. The soil had been turned. What came next wasn't mine to control. Back at the shelter, life moved forward in soft, steady rhythms. The sewing continued. New girls came. Some left with healed bruises and jobs in hand. Others stayed, quiet, watching the world through windows. One of them, a girl named Radha, asked me one evening, "Did you ever have children?" I was folding fabric. My hands paused midair. I had been asked this before. By strangers, by officials, by women in the kitchen line. And I always said the same, no. God didn't give me that blessing. But this time, I couldn't lie. Not again. Not now. I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were soft, waiting, not judging. Yes, I said. Her eyebrows lifted, surprised. A daughter, I continued. Her name is Mira. I gave birth to her when I was 17. I never got to raise her. Radha sat up straighter. Why not? I hesitated. Then I said the thing I'd never said aloud. Because I wasn't allowed to. My family said I brought shame. They made me give her away. And when I didn't fight hard enough, I believed I deserved it. The words came like stones pulled from deep water. Heavy, wet, but necessary. Radha didn't say anything. She just reached out and touched my arm. You were just a girl, she said. And I broke. Not loudly. Just a quiet cracking, deep in the chest. The kind that sounds like freedom. Later that night, I pulled out the second notebook. The one I kept hidden beneath my mattress. In it, I wrote the full story. Every truth. Every wound. Every name I had been called. Every bruise that had faded before someone could see. I wrote about the day they took Mira. I wrote about the nights I begged for forgiveness to gods who never answered. I wrote about the lie I told her years ago when I visited in secret and said I was just a neighbor from the past, because I couldn't bear to destroy her peace with the truth that I had failed her once. But I knew now the truth had power even if it came late. I closed the notebook and sealed it in an envelope. I wrote her name on it in careful letters. And beside it, I wrote, "To be opened when you're ready." Or not at all. The next day, I gave it to the nun. If she comes, I said, or asks, give her this. The nun nodded. It was done. I had told the truth. Not to shift the blame. Not to ask for absolution. But to free the silence that had chained me for 40 years. I didn't know if Mira would ever come again. But I would no longer wait in shame. Before I begin this last part, may I say something? If you've come this far with me, if you've listened quietly through each memory, each cruelty, each escape, I want to thank you. It matters. Your presence, it gives strength. Not just to me, but to others like me. Those who've never spoken their story aloud. So, if you can, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, Whispers and Wills. It helps keep voices like mine alive in a world that so often turns away from pain. And before we part, tell me, where are you from? Leave it in the comments. Sometimes knowing where someone is listening from makes the world feel less lonely. Now, let me finish. I'm an old woman now. My hair has gone white, my hands are worn. But each line on my palm, every scar on my body, is a record of survival. For decades, I carried a lie, not to deceive, but to protect. I told my daughter I was someone else. A kind neighbor. A visitor from her early life. Because I thought, if I revealed myself, I might shatter her peace. But peace built on silence is fragile. So I wrote the letter. I left it by her gate. And when she replied, with just a few words, I knew she remembered. And she had not erased me entirely. I don't live in fear anymore. I live among women who've been broken, yes, but who've also begun to rebuild. Together, we stitch fabric, laughter, and grief into something useful. Something new. Mira hasn't come to see me. That's all right. I don't need her to forgive me. I only need her to know I never stopped loving her. And to my youngest grandson, the boy who asked where I went, I say this now, if you ever hear my voice, I left because I had to, but not because I didn't love you. I loved you enough to leave the place that taught you cruelty. The people who hurt me, they don't hold my story anymore. I do. And I pass it now to you. Carry it gently. Tell it to someone who needs to hear they can walk away. That it's not too late. That their story can still be told, not in shame, but in survival. This is my truth. My final confession. And no, I have no regret. Only relief. That at last, I lived as the woman I was never allowed to be. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.